It is so wonderful when you're so engaged with each other that it's hard to pull back. Here's the good news. We get to keep these conversations going right after this panel, right down the street, for our extended reception and networking time. So I'm going to, I hate doing this too because the conversations are so rich. Shh. If you can hear my voice, clap once. If you can hear my voice, clap twice. If you can hear my voice, clap 3 times. Thank you so much. That's the closest I ever get to applause, so you just helped my day as well. What a rich day we've had together with one final panel before we enjoy our networking time at Hoppy's Rail Yard Kitchen and Hop Garden, which is right nearby. But we do have one more panel, and I promised you earlier that we will start on time and end on time to respect your time without robbing any of these amazing panels of their time. So thank you for coming back in and filling back in and being so fully engaged with our panelists and each other. With that, it is a pleasure to introduce the moderator of our next panel. As our moderator and panelists come forward, Darwin, could you join me at the microphone?
Happy to.
I have a rule of trying never to butcher people's names first or last. And since this is the first time we've really had the pleasure to stand together,
Sure.
I don't want to butcher your last name.
Sure, I can announce my own last name. I'm
Would you
Darwin
mind?
Musavi.
Musavi.
Yes.
And I would have got it right, but I didn't want to guess. Darwin Musavi was appointed Deputy Secretary for Environmental Policy and Housing Coordination at the State Transportation Agency in August of this year. Ooh, cool. And Darwin's fan club is here as well. And Darwin served as Sustainability Project Manager at Caltrans prior. I'm going to allow Darwin to introduce his own panel. And Darwin, how much time are you allowing each panelist for any introductory remarks so that Teresa can continue to do the great job she's doing for us?
Sure. Well, I'm planning to say very little myself to provide all of my time to the rest of the panelists because we have a great group here. I have not been here so far. How much time has been allowed so far? I think
about 5 minutes, we've been told.
Okay, well, if I don't speak, can we do a little bit more than that for everybody?
Well, the good news is the panel lasts another 71 minutes.
Okay.
And these are just the introductory remarks, so you can engage them however you'd like.
Great.
But it'll help Teresa to help all of us to stay on time.
Okay. I'm gonna negotiate for like 7 or 8 because I think folks have a good amount of slides and whatnot they would like to present, if that's okay. Is that all right?
Sure.
we have an ongoing negotiation. I see 7. We'll go with that.
Thank you.
All right. Yes. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. Again, since I just negotiated for all that time, I want to take as little time as possible. But we have a great panel here today talking about housing and transportation linkages, and more particularly, obviously, given the symposium about active transportation and linkages to housing. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just turn it over to our first speaker, who is Chanel Fletcher from Climate Plan. Again, since you all have bios, I won't read bios to save time, if that's okay with the panelists.
That's fine with me. I was using my phone to show the panelists my super adorable kids. I don't have any pictures for this today, so sorry about that. So I have 7 minutes. I think it's a favorite time. Mine's not working. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Okay, yeah, I was like, don't put the time on me yet. So I think the mic's on. Are we all ready? Okay, let's start the clock then. So I am here today trying to get clear on my, presentation. I didn't do slides because I didn't feel inspired. And today what I really want to talk about is inspiration. And I think I want to come from a place of authenticity and inspiration when we talk about housing and transportation. And I want to take a step back, and I could have talked about all the technical things and all the cool policies and all that stuff, but I want to just ground this in people, and I think Tamika did a great job of that this morning, and so I'd like to do the same thing if you guys can indulge me a bit. So my name is Chanel Fletcher. I am the Executive Director of Climate Plan, but today I'm just coming to you guys as Chanel, and we can just have a conversation, I hope. And one of the things I wanted to talk about was that as a kid, I was a military brat, so my dad was in the Navy. My mom worked her way up literally from kind of being an administrative assistant to ending up being a registered nurse. So we moved around a lot as a kid. One of the things that I really wanted, beyond like a Barbie dollhouse, was I wanted to walk to school. And I mean that with all the seriousness, because when we were in the military, I lived in Oklahoma, I lived in Ohio, I've been in Illinois, I've been all over, and my dad never chose to live on base. So we always ended up getting driven to and from school. And all of my friends would go to school and they were on base, so they would walk back to their homes and they would hang out and they would play. And every time I got stuck going back off base home. And so I remember when we came to California, one of the things that I was super excited about was because we had spent a summer in Fresno. And I thought Fresno was the coolest thing on the planet because because my cousin, she lived in kind of like an older kind of community in Fresno, probably was low income. I didn't know that at the time because I didn't know those words. I was like 11. And she had a market on her corner, and her school was down the street, and all of her friends went to that school, so they were all in her neighborhood. So we would walk to the corner market, we would buy Lucas. I don't know if y'all know about that, but if you do, see, somebody knows it in the back, right? You know what I'm talking about. And we would buy Lucas, we would go to the playground because her school had an open policy, like an open siding policy. We would hang out, and then maybe we would go to Sally's house and hang out, and then all I had to do was be back at my aunt's house by probably around 6 p.m. There was no where are you at? We're scared, we're nervous, because there was a whole pack of us, and we would just run around this neighborhood, and it was amazing. And I remember thinking, that's it. That's what California is about. Every place is like Fresno, and when we moved to Sacramento, this is gonna be my reality. Time check here, right? So I ended up moving to Sacramento. I moved to South Sac. South Sac, if you guys know South Sac, anybody? South Sac? See, this is how it is. This is the other thing. I can get to that later. But I moved to South Sac, and when I got to South Sac, I was like, wait a second. I'm in a sea of what I didn't know at the time was single-family homes. That's all it was. It was single-family homes. We had a school kind of in the middle, and we had a park, and that was it. And I was like, wait, so I can't walk to the store. Okay, that sucks. The school that I thought I was going to be able to walk to, which is John Reith Elementary, ended up being overcrowded, so I got bused to Herman Leinbach, which, if you know South Sac, that's over by Valley High, and I actually live closer, over by Central Parkway. So I couldn't even walk to and from school. I got bused there. And then it was every time my parents were like, well, no, we're not going to let you walk across town to go hang out with your friends. So I was yet again stuck in this place where I had to rely on my parents to drive me to and from school and anywhere else that I wanted to go. So all that autonomy that I had when I was at my cousin's house in Fresno just vanished. And I remember thinking, this sucks. So part of the question that I wanted to ask was why are we here today? And so with my story, you could say, well, okay, there's a problem here. The problem is that you want more autonomy and freedom, and if you were 16 or older, we could give you a car, and that would solve that problem. Since you're not 16, what we could do is think about things like infill, mixed use, transit-oriented development. So those are some of the things my panelists will probably talk about today. And those things would solve, or could solve, for that problem there. Here's the catch, though. And here's why I bring up that I grew up in South Sac. The other thing, and I think Tamika touched upon this when she was talking a little bit about how she grew up. So my parents, and my dad in particular, was really big on me knowing my history as a Black woman. And I think the thing that he reinforced time and time again was my history around segregation, around civil rights. And so by the time I was 10, we were talking about Emmett Till, we're talking about Medgar Evers, we're talking about these icons in the civil rights movement and the injustices that they faced. And so I had this huge responsibility that I knew about in terms of the civil rights movement and what I was supposed to do and how I was supposed to carry that on, because my parents were working so hard to give me this access, right? And I was like, wow, this is a lot to carry, but I understand it. And I would ask us to think about, when we're talking about housing and transportation, there's a way that we can keep it to that infill conversation, that TOD, and we can start to solve for the questions of how do we give people more access to get to the places they want to go. I think what we don't talk about, but what's really there, is like redlining. We don't talk about segregation. The reality is that I'm from South Sac, and if you are from Sacramento, who in here is from Sacramento? Right, so there's some people in here from Sacramento. In general, whenever I ask like, hey, you're from Sacramento? I am too. Where are you from? If you're Black, Latino, Southeast Asian, 9 times out of 10, you're either from North Sacramento or South Sacramento. And we have a completely different conversation. It's like, oh my God, you're from South Sac? I am too. What high school did you go to? We do this whole thing, right? If you're white and from Sacramento, the odds of you being from North or South Sac go down. And I would say it's about 20 to 30%. Most likely you're from Fair Oaks. You're from, East Sacramento. And these places are very, I would say, like traditionally tend towards more wealthy and more white. And that's something that we don't talk about. Okay, I have a minute. We don't talk about it, but it's real. Because a lot of these communities, there was practices in place where we very clearly said, like, no, if you are of color, you're not going to be in Fair Oaks. We're going to do racial covenants. We're going to do redlining. We're going to make sure that you don't have access to be in this place. And the thing that I probably could have done a slide on is to show you that when you still look at Sacramento today, because people want to say, well, like, we outlawed redlining. It's illegal now. And segregation, that's a thing of the past. We did, Fair Housing Act. What are you talking about? Look at the maps, and Dr. Jesus Hernandez at UC Davis has research on this too. You'll see if you compare the demographics of Sacramento now to the demographics of Sacramento right around like the 1950s, you'll see that it still matches up, that the Black and brown people of color, are still predominantly in North and South Sacramento. And that is because we are still, as planners, and I take this as myself, and I put this on myself as my own history as a planner, we are not planning for, okay, time's up. I'm gonna go a little bit longer. Just give me like 2 minutes, and I swear, this is a lot to wrap up, right? So 2 minutes. As planners, I think what we're dealing with and grappling with is that we have this history of racism and segregation. And even if we're talking about things like infill and TOD, that does not solve that problem. And if you wanna know how does transportation come into play with this, transportation facilitated this. And I think that's what we're seeing, right? It's like, there's a way that we built these communities so that if you're in Fair Oaks, you never have to go to South Sac. Seriously, there's no reason for you to be in South Sacramento. Conversely, there was no reason for me to be in Fair Oaks. We built that. I never went to East Sacramento as a child because I never had to. Folks from East Sacramento rarely ever come out to South Sac because we built a transportation infrastructure and system where we don't do that. And so now I think, when I think about that, that's what I think about when I think about what are the challenges that we're faced with and what do we need to address and tackle. And it's not so much how do we give Chanel accessibility and mobility to get to where she wants to go? Because now it's okay, I have a car. And even if we're talking about kids, there's Safe Routes to School programs, and there are things where we're trying to do that work. But where I see the gap at and where I see that we're not doing this work, I don't see us trying to think about and tackle how do we start to break down these structural inequities around red light communities, around racial covenant communities? How do we start to look at this transportation infrastructure, which may not actually be helpful and still isn't helpful, and how do we look at that and start to create a real change? And that's the place where I think I would say, I'm gonna let it go right now. I would open that up for us to think about as we listen to the other panelists who are talking, and also for us to engage with as planners and transportation professionals. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Chanel, for that amazing opening, and fairly succinct, if I don't mind saying so myself. Next, we have Josh Rosa from the Department of Housing and Community Development.
Is this on? Oh, it is. And does this next? Oh, that's Darwin. Oh, these are all of our panelists.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is Okay, so this is me. So I'm from the California Department of Housing and Community Development, and I want to just start first with, what does HCD do? This is our mission statement, and we stick to it pretty literally. Of course, in today's situation, given the current supply of affordable housing in California, this mission requires us to radically accelerate the production of housing. From 2007 to 2017, production averaged about 80,000 new homes getting built in California each year. But the problem is population change actually created demand for 180,000 new homes getting built each year in California. So significant shortfall every year for many years. We're at a point now where just to catch up to the current demand and try to address the shortage, we need an estimated 3.5 million new homes built over the next 5 years. That's a stretch goal, but we're taking it very seriously. But here's the kicker with those 3.5 million new homes. They have to be transportation efficient. They have to be, because if they're not actually fulfilling this mission. And this is one reason why. So this chart shows in the blue bars, if you look at those, that is the average housing cost as a percentage of income for different counties. And this is troubling news because research and expertise and HUD all advise you shouldn't pay more than 30% of your gross income on your housing. Now, in the green bars, and if you do, it's called housing cost burden, and it's a significant factor of poverty. Now, in the green bars, you see the transportation cost, and the acceptable ceiling for transportation costs, including gas, car maintenance, and other costs, is about 20% of your income. So you see we're over the acceptable ceiling for costs in both categories in most counties. At the same time that housing is too expensive, transportation is also getting too expensive, especially for lower income households. And a primary reason why is that the commute from home to work to other daily destinations and regular destinations has been growing longer and longer because of a low-density development pattern. To make homes more affordable, we have to reverse that low-density development pattern because it doesn't do us any good to shrink the blue bars if we're only growing the green bars. Or put another way, a home isn't affordable if you can't get to it affordably. So when we talk about effectively quadrupling the rate of production of housing, it's not just about the rate that matters. We also have to plan the location of housing in a fundamentally different way than has been the case for many, many years, for decades really. And that's why transportation efficiency is so important. Here's another reason why I think a lot of people have seen this chart. This shows greenhouse gas emissions in California by sector. The blue bar is the transportation sector, accounting for about 41% of all emissions. And we're not really making progress in transportation the way that we are in other sectors in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And it's because the average vehicle miles traveled have been going up instead of going down. Again, just owing to that low-density development pattern that characterizes so much of the growth in California. The question is, how do we address it in a way that we can actually dramatically change the way that we plan and invest in land use, housing, and transportation? We need land use planning to incorporate at a much deeper systemic level a sensation of how different land use choices place different kinds of demands on transportation. And likewise, we need transportation planning and investment to incorporate at a much more systemic level how different types of transportation investment, including active transportation, can influence land use choices for better or for worse. So we need better coordination between the disciplines. One such effort is the Housing and Transportation Coordination Workgroup. This is an interagency group at the state level comprised of the departments and agencies you see listed here, and we meet routinely to work on ways to better integrate housing and transportation planning and investment. We've been very busy this year facilitating changes to transportation funding programs that will ideally lead to funded projects being better aligned with state housing and transportation goals. So two of those programs you see listed here are making changes for the 2020 award cycle that are designed to place affordable homes within walkable proximity to transit options and jobs and other daily destinations and regular destinations in such a way that they will boost transit ridership and relieve traffic congestion. Okay, so in addition to that interagency effort on a department level, Here are 3 new programs that HCD is implementing now. And these programs each advance the administration's focus on providing 2 things to local governments: incentives and resources, in order for local governments to help us promote more affordable, transportation-efficient housing. And because the homes have to be transportation efficient, there's really a slice that we can pull out of each of these programs that relate directly to active transportation. So first is IIG. So that funds infrastructure improvements that support higher density, mixed income, and low income housing in areas designated as infill. And this was added to the 1920 budget because what a lot of folks in Sacramento were hearing from local governments and developers throughout the state is that infill housing is too difficult because the required infrastructure upgrades are cost prohibitive. And that's everything from utility hookups to water and sewer upgrades to safety improvements and other types of infrastructure. So IIG funds infrastructure improvements of all kinds, including active transportation. So I just want to call those out here. It'll directly pay for pedestrian and bicycle transit improvements, sidewalk widenings, lighting, signage, and that sort of thing. In addition to that, the scoring process within the program also encourages walkable routes to transit, and it encourages structures that are adjacent to transportation, active transportation facilities. So I wanted to call this out for folks who are thinking about how to apply for or utilize ATP funds and thinking about different funding sources that it might be able to leverage with those ATP funds in a holistic kind of community-centered way. IIG is definitely a resource for that sort of work. It's $500 million. Most of that is going to be competitive in large counties. There's a set aside for counties with less than 125,000 people. So it's mostly competitive. And we're going to release the NOFA and adopt the final guidelines really any day now. It might be tomorrow. And then the applications will be due very early next year or very late this year with awards later in the spring. And this is our webpage for folks who, once the NOFA is released, it'll be there, and there's a whole bunch of additional detail too. And my time is up. So I'm going to hand it off here. For folks who want to see the rest of my slides, I have way too many. You can go online. These are all going to be on the website. And if you have any questions about the content on there or advice or comments, please just send me an email. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Josh. Next, we have Daniel Bartleson from Evan Brooks Associates.
So appreciate being here. Thank you to everybody. Thank you for the chance to talk with you today. Generally speaking, historically, I've had the opportunity to kind of work as the gap or to close the gap between what's going on in Sacramento and oftentimes what's going on in the communities, and that's working in the local government agency as a project implementer. But now here I am able to develop and deliver projects through funding sources for communities so that they can get these projects implemented. And so I hope to build a little bit off of what Josh has said here today. But HUD reports that the first step in creating both a walkable and bikeable community, implementing that active transportation, is setting it up at a high level, at a planning level, establishing a set of plans to be able to implement those programs. It's really important that that planning process really starts and includes a lot of the important feedback and community input that we've already heard about and talked about. It's not just me sitting at a table and deciding, yeah, that looks like a really great project. It's hearing from those people that are living in the communities, working in those communities, trying to get to those job centers, the parks, hearing what it is that they're looking to do. Well, we find ourselves in a really interesting, kind of unprecedented time, in my opinion, especially as it relates to funding opportunities. Josh certainly mentioned IIG. What we see is a real alignment between what's going on at the state and what the communities are needing. Certainly, we see the state has decided to start trying to make housing development easier, trying to allow SB2 funding for communities to start to shift their policies to encourage development and set up development opportunities within those communities. And then you start seeing grant programs, for instance, Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities, the Caltrans Sustainable Communities, HUD's Choice Neighborhoods Implementation Program, Transformative Climate Communities. These are all opportunities where your agencies can take advantage of funding and not just develop housing opportunities, but integrate that with active transportation. Usually what we see is communities are looking at one single situation, one single scenario. They're looking at housing, or they're looking at safety issues, they're looking at active transportation, and they're not looking at mechanisms for which they can integrate the two. And those conversations need to take place concurrently. These are conversations that can and need to be going on at the same time. I'm missing some of my slides. All right, there we go. So we have a lot of funding opportunities out there that are setting you up as you seek to go after that ATP funding when it does come out after HSIP, some of the congestion mitigation and air quality funding that's been recently out there. These plans set you up to better serve your communities and implement those projects that they're looking for. What type of planning opportunities can you get out of these things? Updates to your general plan, your mobility, your housing element, your zoning code to allow for improved and enhanced developments, make it easier for people to be able to develop on their own property or develop new housing opportunities. Set up with specific plans through your TOD and TFC type plans, your corridor plans, and then really drilling down as it gets deeper into your active transportation, your bicycle type master plan processes. These are really important because each of these is an opportunity to bolster the end goals. You're developing the housing, you're getting people from the housing to their job centers, to those places that they want to go to most. And these planning opportunities really set the tone for being able to do so. What I wanted to call out here is kind of the regionality and the importance of regionality when it comes to projects. So your projects don't stop at your community borders. Oftentimes, your residents and those people that live and work in your communities, they're going beyond your borders. And it's important to recognize that. It's important to acknowledge the fact that you have a lot of residents, a lot of communities that are around your area. So what you see here is you really see the heart of Los Angeles. You can see Los Angeles downtown at the head there. This is right around the Blue Line Slauson Station. What you see here is an opportunity for LA County to develop a TOD, TOC type opportunity. But what is not seen here is the fact that you have the communities of Vernon, Bell, Huntington Park, Maywood, and other communities that are really being able to take advantage of this sort of development. And without that communication, without that planning that really integrates all those voices, you're missing out on a golden opportunity. Instead, you're potentially developing a bridge to nowhere where you have a series of plans that really doesn't seek to take advantage of benefits to each community. And with that, I get to hand it over to Corey.
All right. Next we have Corey Wilkerson, formerly City of Santa Ana, now at SCAG.
Hello. All right. First, I would like to express gratitude for Tamika being the first one to drop an F-bomb on the stage today. I really appreciate it. It lowers my stress down quite a bit because I'm not the most professional human being up here by any stretch of the imagination. And so if I accidentally say the F word during my talk, then I appreciate it. It takes so much off. So this is my approach to planning. The middle one is probably the most important in my opinion. If you're going to go out into the community, you need to be ready to be a punching bag. People are coming to you, and there's been a lot of talk about this. When you're going into a community and you're talking about transportation projects, you're talking about active transportation, people have opinions about what's happening in their community. And sometimes they need a place to place those opinions. And it's your responsibility as a planner to serve as a basket for them. So I tell people this all the time. Imagine that you're holding a basket there in front of you, and they're going to take a bunch of apples, all of the issues that they have, and they're going to throw them into your basket. And then you just got to take it and hold that basket for a little while, go through the basket, figure out what's yours. What in that basket is something that you can address as part of the project, as part of the plan, as part of the things you're doing. Apologize for whatever it is that has happened in the past. Accept that the organization that you represent is probably responsible for that, and you should apologize on their behalf as a representative from that organization. And then at the end of the conversation, you get to give some of those apples back, but you better keep some of them and take them with you. You got to be a sponge. Go out there and learn as much information as you can from as many different amazing human beings as like the ones we got to see so far today, and then we'll get to see some more tomorrow. And then I'm also, without question, a thief. I'm not going to give anybody any credit for any idea that I steal from them. We're not reinventing the wheel. I've written planning documents that literally have full cut and paste in there. There's no bibliographies. We're not in college anymore, you guys. Save yourself a lot of trouble. So I spent the last 5 years working in the city of Santa Ana. And the city of Santa Ana is an amazing place to work. It's right in the heart of Orange County, and I'm not from Orange County, I'm from LA County, so for me, I'm like, ew, behind the orange curtain. And did you see the graph that Josh showed earlier where it shows Orange County's housing cost is 44% of your financial burden? They're not joking, it sucks. So I went to Santa Ana and I was like, all right, the only city in Orange County that I'm willing to work in is Santa Ana. So I applied for a job there, I got a job there. And one of the first things that I noticed is that it's segregated. It's like 80% Hispanic Latino. So like as the token white guy that has to go into that community and I need to know that. I need to be aware of that and I need to acknowledge that. When I first came, we just had a going away party where all the community-based organizations that I've worked with, they threw me like a farewell send-off. And one of them said to me, the first time I met you, I was like, oh, who's this white guy coming in? And she's like, and now you're like my favorite white dude. So if you're a white person and you're going into a community, that should be your goal. You should be going in there and accepting that there are privileges that you have that the people that you're speaking with don't already have. And you need to apologize for that, and you need to do everything you possibly can to try and address those things. So one of the things is we did a Vision Zero plan there where we analyzed all the collision data, and then we overlaid it with demographic information. And sure enough, the census tracts where we see the highest populations of Latino, the lowest levels of income, lowest levels of education, are the places where we're seeing the most significant collisions, most severe collisions are happening. So if you're focusing on projects in a city, those are the areas where you should be focused. Those are the areas where historically has been the most disinvestment, and that's why these things are happening. So you have folks that are the most dependent on walking and biking because in Orange County transit is awful. And so they have to walk everywhere. You see moms pushing strollers, you see kids walking to school. Most of our schools in Santa Ana have more than 50% of kids walking to school. That's the goal for a lot of other cities that are out there. We're already there. So I'm like, all right, let's just try and make it safe for the kids. Because right after I started with the city of Santa Ana, we had 3 girls that were out trick-or-treating on Halloween night. They were walking in a crosswalk in front of a school, and they were struck by a driver in a hit-and-run collision that killed all 3 of them. And when you start someplace like that, and that's the first experience you have there, it's going to affect everything that you do. And it's heartbreaking. And I went out to that street, and I saw that street, and was like, this is stupid. It's like 4 lanes wide. It only has like 8,000 cars a day on there, so it's overbuilt. It's high speed. Why? For no reason. So this is not walk to school day. This is just Tuesday at one of our crosswalks in front of our schools. I mean, we do walk to school day there too, and it's a big fun thing. We have Star Wars guys. It's awesome. But this is Tuesday. So right after I started with the city, we hosted a 4-day long charrette, and as a planner, I'm like, 4 days, really? You think you're gonna get people to show up for 4 days? Sure as shit. Kids came all 4 days. And these kids aren't like normal kids that you guys meet. These kids, they were asking questions like, is that gonna be a raised median protected bike lane, or is that gonna be a buffer bike lane? They're like intermediate school. I'm like, who are these kids? Where did you come from? You're amazing. it turns out that they work with a community-based organization called KidWorks. And KidWorks, with money from a California endowment, were part of the Building Healthy Communities strategy, and they had taught these kids how to advocate, 14, 15-year-old kids how to advocate. And so after we had our workshop, they said, hey, will you come? We want to give a presentation on this bike ability assessment that we did in Central Santa Ana. That's Central Santa Ana, that dark part right in the middle. So they had already done a bike plan for Central Santa Ana. And as a bike planner, I'm like, sweet, this is amazing. What did I walk into? They'd already done all kinds of outreach. They had spoken with people on the street. They had done surveys. They had done their own data collection, done bike counts. They'd done all their own GIS stuff. I said, you guys want to write a grant? They said, yeah. I said, okay, you can pick any project you want. I don't care. Pick which one. I figured that they would pick some education. They're like, no, we want infrastructure on the street right by our school. I was like, cool. What do you want to do? So $2.4 million grant. That was one of 3 projects selected in Cycle 2 ATP. They were written by a bunch of kids. So, yeah. You can't expect community-based organizations that are largely volunteer-based to keep showing up to things. So you need to figure out ways to fund them, to pay them for anything. Get money coming to these organizations because statistically speaking, you're going to see those folks are going to stick around a lot longer. So we go after grants, OTS grants, non-infrastructure grants, whatever you have to do in order to give as much money to these organizations as you can. Someone earlier said give kids bikes. I think Dr. Thomas said give kids bikes. We do a wrench and ride program in Santa Ana where our local bike co-op, kids come, they learn how to fix the bike, and then they take the bike home. It's their bike now. They earned it. So those types of programs, that should be part of every single infrastructure grant that you ever write, should be written into that. Education programs should be everywhere. Have Rio come to your city and they'll teach people how to teach classes so that you can build up that capacity, so that you have the ability to be able to offer these types of programs in the city that you're in. Time's up, I'm gonna keep going. So going to people where they're at, you know, when I go into the community, I'm usually the only one wearing a headset because I'm the only one not speaking Spanish. So it works out a lot better than anytime I say some stupid jargon thing, engineering jargon, then someone's there to translate it for me into something that makes sense. That's how the community engagement should be happening. So these are the 4 plans. They're working on a 5th plan, a Safe Routes to School plan right now. Having these plans ready to go is an important part of the process because in Santa Ana, when our community development agency came to us and said, hey, we need an active transportation project to go for this affordable housing, sustainable communities grant, and forced us to kind of work together, we already have projects ready to go. So that was our Cycle 4 submittal. That's 18 grant applications that we wrote entirely with in-house staff. It was $120 million worth of ask. So I think if we had gotten all of that, we would have gotten like a third of the funding. Come on, Lori. Come on. But you know, for like 2 months, like me and my boss didn't get a single day off. We worked like 18-hour days, 14-hour days, something like that, really long days in order to be able to package up these applications, in order to be able to submit them. It's a lot of work. But we ended up getting 4 out of those 18 grant applications, but it was about $21 million worth of funding. So let it go. I get it. All right.
Thanks so much, Corey. And now we have Mayor Christopher Cabaldon from West Sacramento.
All right, thank you. So I want to take a different perspective and try to bring back the people into the conversation and also the temporal dimensions of what we're talking about. But I want to just start for those of you who are transportation planners at the regional or state level, to beg you to check your narcissism. That at the community level, at the street level, at no point are we ever just doing transportation planning. And when you leave from your Building Healthy Communities workshops, we still have the same neighborhood the next day, but that next day we're dealing with food deserts, with the lack of a health system, with systemic racism. We're dealing with a whole bunch of other stuff that's going on. And we're dealing with communities that have to live together tomorrow. or we don't come together organized around a common ideology or a common commitment to activism. Quite the opposite. One of my biggest partners around building affordable housing in the community is the Russian Church of the Evangelical Baptists. They believe that when we're done working on affordable housing, that because of who I love, I'm going to hell, and everyone else like me in my city. At the street level, you make your partners every day based on the objectives that you need to get done for the health of all of your community, knowing that you're going to wake up tomorrow and I'll be battling with that Russian Church of Evangelical Baptists. And the NIMBYs that were on the opposite side of the Affordable Housing Project, they'll be standing right with me on issues of civil rights. And so we don't get to pick. It isn't the legislature where half the city or 3/4 of the cities are progressive Democrats and the others are Republicans. We are all there together, and it's a constant shift, just like the Thanksgiving dinner table, of alliances and agreements and personalities and blood chemistry that's in play. And so have some respect for the place and for the actual people who you're excited about with your Post-it notes and your dots, that we will still be here tomorrow having to solve our own problems again. And so that our work on transportation, active transportation in particular, sits in that stream. The second dimension of that is we're almost always wrong. I mean, the two worst people at predicting the transportation choices and behavior of residents of any neighborhood in my city, the two worst ones are me and them. We have a horrible record of guessing what forms of change we will adopt and embrace and can't live without, and which ones we can't. When we ask folks, what do you think about biking? Bicyclists tell us uniformly, you need to build more infrastructure. And non-bicyclists tell us uniformly, you need to buy some more helmets. Right? These are the two categories of people in the community about what we should be doing about cycling. When certainly when Uber and Lyft came out, nobody said that they would ride it. You'd have to be crazy to ride it. But even when we contemplated a city-operated rideshare service on demand at the same rate as transit, there was no groundswell of people saying that's a good idea. In fact, quite the opposite. Folks thought it's either a really crappy rideshare or it's an unsustainable transit system. But either way, I would never ride such a thing. It's ridiculously popular. It's one of the most popular things that we've done, but we couldn't have imagined that at the outset. And our own policy of building affordable housing whenever we open a new neighborhood, first we start with affordable housing, not after. Wildly unpopular when we started it. People said, well, if you do that, nobody's going to move into these neighborhoods. And they are now the anchors of our most popular neighborhoods. And so having some humility about our own projection of our own future selves, but also recognizing that we all have this problem. We're horrible predictors of our acceptance and our embracing of change. And therefore, just surveying or just more workshops isn't necessarily going to produce either a progressive outcome or an effective one, but actually the most appropriate outcome for what each of us wants as individuals as well. So I think we are learning a lot about user-centered design and other approaches to try to grapple with it. There's no perfection. Mostly you just have to try things and see how people actually react, rather than asking an uninformed opinion or substituting your own godlike judgment in advance, which is also ineffective. But trying things, experimenting, iterating, and seeing what works and learning from what doesn't work about what the underlying behaviors has become critically important for us. I think since I'm in state lecturing mode while you're here in the Central Valley and not in the Bay Area, I think the second challenge that we're grappling with is the notion of time, the temporal dimensions of housing and transportation, the sense of crisis that exists in state government, largely driven by the coasts, but felt in places like Sacramento and certainly in West Sacramento is very strong. But the conditions are radically different. If we were to build on every single parcel today, if we were to build housing on every single parcel today that was available, we would be building probably at 20–30% of the density that parcel could support, given even our own general plan. But the market, but more importantly, the financing market for mixed-use and housing projects in the Central Valley is not what it is in San Francisco, where I could take the empty parcel across the street from here, zone it for whatever, 100 stories, and somebody would build it. Here, it should support 10 stories, but the most that will get built right now in the market is 3. So if I build on every single parcel that exists right now on a by right basis as an example, then the actual capacity of the land in my community, the capacity of the community to absorb even more people affordably is permanently diminished. By a large measure. And so this question about when we conceive of the problems of California solely in the way that they are the most extremely visible in the coastal regions, creates some real problems around equity short-term and long-term in the communities in which we serve. Similarly on the active transportation side, because if we do that, if we build the 3-story instead of the 10-story, our ability to support the kinds of density of walking or density of biking that creates the visibility that is the thing that's the most important for improving safety, at least as important as infrastructure and certainly more important than helmets. In order to drive those improvements, to finance those improvements, we need the higher levels of density. And so we have local strategies for how to grapple with this, and we need state help for sure, which is why all of the investment programs that both HCD and CTC and others are mounting are really important, but understanding this dimension of time. Because as folks move into just the district to the south of here, which had a major amount of funding from the state for infrastructure, for affordable housing, for active transportation. Actually, we won all of those funding grants. The challenge is folks move in right now. We don't have the levels of density around them to support those alternate modes. So they are building a lifestyle around parking. Our most oversubscribed residences in the entire city for parking are our affordable housing complexes. Our projections, our tax credit applications, everything else. Look, this is the 21st century. We don't need cars everywhere. We need to deal with the issues that Josh talked about around affordability. That's not the reality, though. The reality is that we've got many more cars per unit at our affordable housing developments than we can support. But it also means that all the projections that we had about how we could revitalize transit with these projects are not coming true. That doesn't mean that's the permanent outcome, but if we're not conceiving of the life cycle of transit and affordable housing and of active transportation along the way, then no amount of single-shot planning is likely to solve this. Just as I'll stop in a second, but just the planner and city council and mayoral hubris that we know what the answer is, and if we just come up with the policy and implement tomorrow, is a challenge, because that's not how real markets work. And planners, myself as one of them, I was the chair of SACOG when we wrote the blueprint, which was the inspiration for SB 375. Before that, we were insistent on a jobs housing balance. That was the planners' religion of the late part of the last century, and it's the main cause of our principal transportation problems in this region today. Suburb to suburb travel, because we insisted on driving a whole bunch of jobs to those suburbs, thinking that then, that it would just magically be that people in Fair Oaks or in Folsom are now working these jobs. They're not working those jobs. They're driving to folks from Roseville are driving to Folsom, folks from Folsom are driving to Citrus Heights, folks from Citrus Heights are driving back to Roseville again. All of that exists because it was the progressive thing to do at that point was to insist on a jobs housing balance without taking account of the market and the people. And I think we have an opportunity to learn better about how, not particularly in inland California, to do a better job this time around of building an active transportation system that's linked to housing in a way that accounts for the real people and the real markets that they face.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists for that intro. We have about 25 minutes, and I want to open it up to questions. And since we have a limited amount of time, instead of starting with my questions, I'd like to start with all of your questions. And if it's okay with everyone in the audience, I think for the sake of conversation, we'd rather have folks directly ask questions instead of Slido. If there's anyone out there that'd like to start us off, if you want to raise your hand. I see a hand all the way in the back. Great. Are there mics that we can use?
All right. Hey, I just want to say that and you say you're a horrible predictor of change. Incorrect. Also there. I live in West Sacramento. I first came to West Sacramento 25 years ago. People say, "What? You moved there?"
Does that
I guess for the-
question-
So I'll
do I get a
repeat for the
rebuttal?
web since we didn't get that out there. Mayor Cabaldan, you're really cool. Do we have any other questions in the audience? Anyone want to say I'm really cool? No? Don't think it's on.
Who's speaking? Is you?
Hi, John Brazil from San Jose. Mayor, I think you did a great job of describing some of the challenges and institutional challenges, private sector funding challenges, public sector challenges. What are some of the solutions you've come upon in your community to address those challenges? I'd love to learn a little more about that.
So we haven't solved it, but I think so the first is to understand this temporal problem, because it's at the root of a lot of these challenges, is trying to, because we have to decide, just like folks when we apply to the state for grant money have to decide, is this a real thing or not? And the stuff that has often has the biggest long-term impact scores the worst in the short term, because there's not yet people there, or the people that are there in some of the neighborhood, some of the oldest neighborhoods in my city, when we did our projections around bike share, every single one of the projections, both from the experts and from the neighborhood, was like, nobody here's going to ride that. And of course, that did not turn out to be the case, quite the opposite. But we had to have the ability, in a reversible way, to make an investment and see what was going to happen. And so I understand the pressure the state's in, which is we need quantifiable, measurable metrics to which we can hold folks accountable. But that often then results in supporting projects. We also are building some of these like big, gigantic infill projects, and they score really well on some of these programs, because we can show, this many housing units are going to get produced, and we have matching funds from the developer or whatever to build the extra bus stop or the parkway. But those are also the projects that need it the least. Right, because I could squeeze a little bit more money out of that developer. There's nowhere to get money for the most challenged neighborhoods in the city, but they don't produce well on the numbers in the front end. And so I think what we have learned is it's better for us to make small targeted investments that are iterative, and to pay much more attention to the overall system and recognize, okay, we're going to build this segment right now, and it's going to do pretty much nothing in terms of total amount of folks walking and biking. Because we still have to build 3 more after that in different other places in the city to complete the network. And so that's been an important piece. The other is to not just focus on the corridors. I mean, to try to get to the neighborhoods that don't normally show up in these measures, we've done a lot of investments in low stress routes. And those also, because they tend to be longer, are more challenging in terms of the funding metrics. And so although we've put our own money into them, and some of them have scored okay in the state funding programs, they tend not to do as well because they're not on major corridors, and they're slightly longer because people are willing to walk or bike or skate or whatever a little bit longer in order to not be on the arterial.
Thank you.
Can I chime in? I know
Yes,
that question was
please.
not for me, so I am not trying to answer for West Sacramento. Although I too think you're awesome, so I want to point that out. Again, this is like someone from South Sac, not from West Sacramento, but I thought about moving there at one point. I know you're right, because I live in the Bay Area, and just let's we got to have a conversation about that. Anyways, okay, this is my Chanel's personal life. This is not going to make me very popular, but I do want to say this, particularly when we're talking about state funding. I think a lot of the things that we've heard up here, and we've talked about some grant programs. I mean, these grant programs, we're talking about ATP, right? Like 120 million. Oh, we doubled it. Another 120 million. I mean, it sounds like a lot, but it's actually pennies. Like, it's not. When you look at state transportation funding and you compare it to other programs, we're talking about such a low amount of money. And I think that that's something that, I didn't really want to say this, but I'm going to. And folks at the CTC, they know me. They've heard me say this before. So it's not like there's no it's not like I'm not saying this as a wow, surprised Chanel saying this. But it's true is that I think there's a real need and desire. Like if the state is saying we have climate goals, we have equity goals, like whatever we're saying, if we're saying this is what we need to do to like reduce the climate, we need to actually like reduce driving, we need to like, the state needs to put, its money where its mouth is. Sorry, Darwin, but like I think it's true. And I think that, like I know there's advocates in here, like Cal Walks and Cal Bike did like SB 740, not SB 743, it was SB 127, for example, right? And the whole idea of it was like looking at money that comes from this program that's around like repaving and maintaining roads. And the idea was that if you're going in to do that, you're gonna, look at complete streets infrastructure. And they had like all these things around, like we're gonna do it for certain places. And the whole idea was like, yes, like we need to start taking these big pots of money and helping to like make sure that people actually have the funding to do those kind of networks. And it didn't move forward. And I think, the governor has this like executive order now out where he's talking about we need to align, state transportation funding to our climate goals. And everybody's freaking out about the I-tip and the idea of like, oh my God, wait, you're deprogramming money from these like roads in like the Central Valley and for projects that aren't even like in construction yet. And to like create a pot for what? For like rail and transit? I don't understand. But I'm like, I think when we hear these things, and I guess I'm bringing this up because I'm like, when you hear that like people are saying like we don't have enough money or we're like, we put in like 120 million for like ATP, in part it's because we don't have enough of those big state transportation funding programs funding this kind of work. And so I would say that like there is a need to kind of push for that, and there's a need for both like I think the state to think about what does it mean to be transformative in the sense that I think Dr. Destiny Thomas was talking about, where we're actually looking at those funding pots and trying to transform them. So I'll get off my soapbox, but I just wanted to say.
Thanks, Chanel. No need to apologize, by the way. I don't accept your apology. To the mic in the middle.
Chanel said a large part of what I wanted to raise it, that a lot of our transportation funding is still going to low density housing developments. That's why we spend it there. That's what it accomplishes. So I would like to hear from the panelists about what we do about that problem.
HCD first?
I can go. So there is a lot of state funding that does perpetuate low-density development, and I think that increasingly there are new programs and there are new policy preferences to try to reverse course in that regard. So some might say too little too late, or it's a drop in the bucket, but we have the IIG program, which we talked about, which is focused on increasing not just housing, but infill housing, urban-centric housing. And in addition to that, we have, I was going to go back to my slides. So HCD now is going to start recognizing and designating local jurisdictions as being pro-housing, some of them, if they adopt policies that are furthering the production of location-efficient infill housing. And that's not just a plaque that goes on the city manager's wall if you get the designation, it's also extra credit when you apply for funding programs. When you apply for funds under competitive programs, it's something that will give additional points or some other preference to the jurisdictions that are pro-housing designated. So in that way, we're rewarding the good actors with the dollars so that they can put it to good use in accordance with land use plans and policies and permitting processes and other adjustments that they can make to try to reverse the course of low density development. And at the same time that we're raising the bar on local governments in that regard, the state is also providing funding specifically to help them try to get there. And that's an early action planning grant program that we're looking to release a NOFA on that one very early next year. And it's $250 million. Half of that goes to cities and counties, and the other half goes to COGS and regional entities. And that's dollars that cities and counties can use to hire staff or consultants or commission analyses or whatever it takes for them to make the adjustments that they need to make to prioritize that kind of location-efficient housing production. And we do have a focus on production of supply of housing, but again, it does have to be that transportation-efficient type of housing.
So that's great, and I think I would love to talk with you actually about this. We should talk offline about this too. But I think some of the things that I think about, and some of this is just informed by what I was listening to today, and I think the biggest thing that we can start to do when we're talking about these things is take a step back. And I think part of what I loved about what America Baldwin was saying was talking about like our hubris. And I think as a planner, so I'm a planner by trade. I'm choosing not to speak in like plannerese right now and just be real because I want this to be as accessible as possible. I think that there is great hubris in what we do and how we think about these things. And so I appreciate the idea of like stepping back from that. And I think also just being very transparent about like, hey, like maybe what we're projecting is completely wrong. And like, we found that out, or maybe it's like, right, we don't know. With that said, I think I also was really inspired by the previous panel to think about how are we talking about the community? And I think you've heard community a lot. So like the way that I'm talking about community is I'm talking about like actual like residents who live in these places and how they are being shaped. And I think a lot of times where like people have said to me repeatedly, oh, well, Chanel, like, that's not us. Like, that gets baked in at this level. That's, like, this person's job. That's that person's job. And I think kind of, Corey, you're talking about, right? Like, as a planner, you're like, this is what I can do, and this is what I cannot do. And I think I have been that person myself. So, like, I'm owning that for me. Like, I have said, like, this is not going to general plan, so, like, I can't deal with that. Sorry. And I think, to me, the question now is that if we really are serious about tackling these challenges, and that's a question in and of itself, like, are we really being serious? And like, what challenges are we talking about tackling? Like, I brought up like redlining, segregation, like race, like, so not just like location efficient housing, but actually thinking about how we are like moving people so people aren't still segregated. Like, are we trying to tackle that? That's a question in and of itself. But beyond that, like, there's the money piece of it, and then there's the piece of like, how are we designing these programs? Like, who's weighing in? As a statewide organization climate plan, like I swear to God, I've been to like a million different workshops, and like I've written tons of comment letters, and I've done all these different things, and I'm realizing like, hey, wait a second, like, is this the best way that I can use my time? And the question for me is like, how are state agencies and how are we as statewide organizations actually facilitating real engagement from people that live in these neighborhoods? And so what does that mean? How do we do it? And I think some of the things like Dr. Destiny Thomas and I think like Rio were already kind of talked about, like, here's a way to do kind of like community engagement. And I'm like, how can that be tied in and locked into like funding programs? So like if you're applying for a grant program, you are required, that's not working. You're required to do these steps and show that. Like, can we start to put that into place so that by the time it gets to the state level, we're not saying it wasn't on me, but we're actually saying, oh, wow, you checked the box. You partnered with a community-based organization. You did this part of the 10-point platform. Like, you actually paid the community organization for their time. Like, can we put those steps in and lock those into those state kind of funding programs so that we're actually getting real kind of community-driven and community-led solutions? Like, that's one thing that I've been thinking about. And then the other piece is, like, I appreciate what you're sharing about the grant programs. I mean, it's still that challenge of like Governor Newsom has said, we want 3.5 million homes built. Like, that's a huge thing. Where are those homes going to be built, and like how much money is being put to that? Because I think, like 500 million is not going to be enough. I'm sorry, Darwin. My mic is off.
You're not supposed to apologize.
I'm done.
I'd like to piggyback on top of that.
Corey.
The Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Grant Program did one unique thing in that it required that any affordable housing project that's funded under that program needs to have an active transportation component. So by having that requirement, it forced, and this is just coming from a local city experience, it forced my community development agency to reach out to me and say, hey, we need to talk about this. We need to discuss and partner together to put together an application. So with each cycle, each NOFA that came out with that funding source, I was having developers reaching out to me directly saying, hey, we want to apply for this funding. We need some help identifying. So it became another mechanism for me to use the plans that we were developing separate from that funding source and to match projects with this funding source. But when I go out to the community and I talk about affordable housing projects, like one-off affordable housing projects, pretty much across the board, what I hear from the community is that those aren't for us. We can't get into them. We can't qualify for them. Our resident status impacts our ability to be able to move into those kinds of places. The fact that we're undocumented means that we can't we can't qualify for that. As a result, in Santa Ana, the average household in Santa Ana is 4.5 people per household. For the rest of Orange County, it's like 2 people per household. So like for every house where there's 1 person living in it, there's another house that has 9. So that's what affordable housing in Santa Ana looks like, is a house that has, 3 people living in the living room and 4 people in each bedroom. And that's the reality of it when we go out and we speak to the community, is that I can take programs like this that are going to build, 70, 80 new units worth of housing, and they're going to be moderate income, even though in Santa Ana, like the amount of people that are well below the low income criteria is astounding. And it all that it seems to do is it seems to bring people in from other parts of the region into Santa Ana, and the population therefore goes up because there's more people moving in, but there's still not more affordable housing for the people that already live there, that are already being impacted by the lack of disinvestment, and it's just bringing in more people. There's no requirement on those housing units that they have to be for Santa Ana residents that live in Santa Ana.
Darwin, just real quick. There's these funding programs are critically important. Tiny though most of them are, they make it. They're the grease at the local level. That's for the places where there are champions. They're really important in saying, look, this thing that you don't really like, or this project you never heard of before, we just got $14 from the state. Well, in that case, let's build that bike lane, because we don't want to leave that $14 on the table. So the small amounts are important, but let's not forget the underlying funding streams that exist that are much more powerful. So if TDA, for example, if you don't spend all your TDA money on transit, you can use it on streets and roads. You could say, except you can't use it in low density suburban subdivisions. You could say that. Maybe I'm giving people a bill idea right now. Right, so CDA is a non-trivial funding source, and tuning that differently might make folks make different local decisions. If the COGS and the MPOs were to stop using anything like a road mile and population formula alone for allocating funding, then you don't get the same benefit for building those things. Because it still turns out that the suburban developer can go to Costco and buy 100 cul-de-sacs for next to nothing in bulk. But if you're trying to build we're trying to build the one bridge over the freeway so that, our poorest neighborhoods can get access to school and to breweries and to everything else that they want to. I have to find some hipster in a beard on Etsy to build that thing out of koa wood, and it's like super expensive. For the price of 10,000 cul-de-sacs, and the cost structure itself is so radically different. But none of the funding programs account for that. They don't, and so not just the little ones, but the major ones, the core programs that are principally formula driven, those formulas have to change if you're going to make systemic change. The little ones are mostly around demonstration. They're really about proving to a community, look, here's what active transportation looks, feels, smells, and sounds like. But it's not, there's no way the ATP program at the funding that it's at, or even twice or 3 times as much, that I can actually deliver the active transportation system that a community needs.
Well, thank you so much for all those comments. We have about 2 minutes. You all made my job really easy by answering my questions without me needing to ask them. So if anyone has any closing remarks before I...
No, I just wanted to reiterate what's been said, both Chanel and certainly Corey and the mayor. Just the importance and the need to be able to understand what it is that your community is looking for and what your community wants. Because it's very easy to sit up, whether it's in the bureaucratic offices, and be able to say, hey, these are the sort of things that we're going to deliver, without actually talking to the community. Because a lot of times the community is going to push back and say that's not exactly what we want. And what we're seeing, and certainly what you've heard up here, is that these grant programs should start requiring that. We've seen that certainly with some of our parks grants at the state level, and we need to start seeing that with the transportation grants at the state level, where we have a required community input such that the community is buying into the projects that are being delivered to them.
Thank you. Well said. And a round of applause for this crew.
Again, to Darwin and Chanel and Josh, Dan, Corey, and Christopher, what a great, thoughtful panel. Now we get to take all this inspiration we have and move it to Hoppy's Railroad Kitchen and Hop Garden and forget everything we learned. No, we won't do that. But do we all know where we're going to be at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning? Right. Okay. So before we leave, we have 3.5 minutes left. One woman, one man who would like to share the key nugget that they learned from this panel. Please stand.
Seriously, right?
Please stand if you have one nugget that you'd like to share from this panel. No? Okay. As an active supporter on the commission for the ATP program, I couldn't agree with you more. Let's mention how far we've come, though, even though we need to go further. We've been fortunate as we're about to enter our 5th round of funding, and that will start around November 1st, that we have been able to move forward with more than 800 grants in our first 4 rounds of funding. So we've come a long way. Senate Bill 1 has doubled the amount of funds we have from $100 million a year to $200 million a year. So I agree with you. We need more, but let's celebrate how far we've come as well. Now, I'm going to try to do this. Could you stand? One more nugget that we learned? Yes, please stand, and if you could give us your first name.
My name is Lara, Uptown Studios. That incorporating human-centered design, and not just that, but listening to your community and all parts of the community, not just those that look like me and that have the money, and to really listen to everybody and get everybody's input.
Excellent. One of the things I love about this group, by the way, is I always bring an even amount of women's cut and men's cut shirts. We're now out of women's shirts. That's how responsive it's been today. And I'm bringing more from my hotel tomorrow, but no, you get this one. Woo, good catch. We have time for one more final observation because I think one other hand went up. I thought so. John Cordes, Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. And John's mother, who just applauded him.
John Cordes, Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition. The takeaway I really focused on was affordable housing isn't affordable if the transportation component isn't included. So it's got to be both.
Wow. Truly an excellent point. Now, with one clap, I want you to once again thank the folks that made today happen by name. Lori Waters, Anya Allenbacher. Did we lose our Caltrans partner? Are you here, Ms. Abramson? Emily, there's no being... Abramson. Good. And I want to thank my commission colleagues who took time from their day jobs, unpaid, to join us today so that we can continue to listen and learn before we try to lead. Tamika Butler, Chris Kehoe, and our chair, Fran Inman. With that, it is precisely 4 p.m. We look forward to seeing you at Hoppy's and tomorrow morning.